The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a territorial marshal who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than standing on Daniel Mitchell's porch with bad news. The ranch house sat in a valley surrounded by the kind of raw, beautiful country that either broke a man or made him stronger, and Daniel had been testing which category he belonged to for the past 7 years since his wife Catherine died in childbirth along with their son. "Daniel Mitchell?" the marshal asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "That's me. I'm Marshal Thompson. Got a letter here from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. You're going to want to read this." Daniel took the official envelope with its government seal and heavy paper, the kind of correspondence that usually meant trouble for someone. He had dealt with the Bureau before, mostly regarding grazing rights and boundary disputes, but something about Thompson's expression suggested this was different. The letter was brief and to the point, which somehow made it worse. "Mr. Mitchell, the territorial government is implementing a new placement program for Indian youth who have proven unsuitable for traditional educational institutions. Based on your previous applications for government work contracts and your isolated location, you have been selected to receive one such individual. Miss Ayana, age 16, Apache heritage, will arrive within the week. Monthly compensation will be provided. This is not a request. Federal Marshal will deliver. Compliance expected. Respectfully, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Territorial Administration." Daniel read the letter twice, then looked up at Marshal Thompson with something between confusion and anger. "They're sending me a prisoner?" "Not exactly a prisoner," Thompson said uncomfortably. "More like a problem they need someone to handle." "What kind of problem?" Thompson shifted his weight, clearly reluctant to elaborate. "Look, Mitchell, I'm just the delivery boy here. But from what I understand, this girl has been through 3 different schools and 2 foster placements. Each time things ended badly." "How badly?" "Fire, theft, running away, one incident with a knife that nobody likes to talk about." Daniel felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. "And they think the solution is to dump her on an isolated ranch with a man she's never met? They think the solution is to put her somewhere she can't cause trouble for anyone important," Thompson said bluntly. "Your place is 40 miles from the nearest town, and you don't have neighbors who'll complain if things go wrong. What happens if I refuse? You don't get to refuse. This comes from federal authority, not territorial. They can make your life very difficult if you don't cooperate." Daniel stared out at the land he had worked so hard to build into something productive and peaceful. 7 years of backbreaking labor had turned raw wilderness into a functioning ranch that provided him with a modest living and the solitude he needed to heal from his losses. Now the government wanted to disrupt all of that by sending him someone who was apparently too dangerous for anyone else to handle. "When?" he asked finally. 3 days. I'll be back with her then." After Thompson left, Daniel spent the remainder of the day trying to figure out how to prepare for the arrival of a 16-year-old Apache girl who had apparently terrorized everyone else who had tried to help her. His house was set up for one person, with a single bedroom and a main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. He would need to create some kind of separate sleeping space, and he would need to figure out how to handle a potentially violent teenager who had no reason to trust him and every reason to resent her situation. But as he worked on converting his storage room into a basic bedroom, Daniel found himself thinking less about the practical challenges and more about what kind of life this girl must have lived to become the kind of problem that the government solved by shipping her off to the middle of nowhere. 3 days later, Marshal Thompson returned with a wagon that contained one small figure hunched in the back, like a caged animal. Daniel watched from his porch as they approached, noting the way the girl sat perfectly still but alert, taking in every detail of her new surroundings with the careful attention of someone who had learned that survival depended on understanding threats quickly. When the wagon stopped, she didn't move. Thompson had to climb into the back and physically guide her down, and even then she moved with obvious reluctance. She was smaller than Daniel had expected, probably no more than 5 feet tall, with long black hair that hung loose around a face that might have been pretty if it hadn't been set in lines of such fierce hostility. "Miss Ayana," Thompson said formally, "this is Daniel Mitchell. He'll be responsible for you from now on." The girl looked at Daniel with dark eyes that seemed to catalog every possible threat he might represent. She wore a simple brown dress that was clean but showed signs of hard use. and she carried nothing except a small cloth bundle that probably contained her only personal possessions. Ayana, Daniel said, testing the pronunciation. That's a beautiful name. She said nothing, but her eyes never left his face. Thompson handed Daniel another official envelope. Instructions, contact information, and some background. Monthly payments will be sent directly. Good luck, Mitchell. You're going to need it. After the marshal left, Daniel and Ayana stood in his yard looking at each other like adversaries sizing up for a fight. She was clearly waiting for him to make the first move, to show his true intentions now that they were alone. Are you hungry? Daniel asked. No response. Thirsty? Still nothing. All right then, let me show you around. Daniel gave her a tour of the property, explaining the layout of the buildings and the basic routines of ranch life. Ayana followed at a distance, never getting close enough to be grabbed, but never far enough away to miss anything important. Her silence was so complete that Daniel began to wonder if she spoke English at all. The room he had prepared for her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest for clothes, and a window that looked out over the valley. When he showed it to her, she examined it with the same careful attention she had given everything else, then set her bundle on the bed without comment. This is yours, Daniel said. Private. I won't come in without permission. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion that this was some kind of trick. That evening, Daniel prepared dinner for two, setting plates on the small table and waiting to see if she would join him. After 20 minutes, he went to her room and knocked gently on the door. Dinner's ready. Not hungry, came the reply, the first words she had spoken since arriving. All right, I'll leave a plate for you in case you change your mind. Daniel ate alone, as he had every night for 7 years, but somehow the solitude felt different now. There was another person in his house, another heartbeat, another set of problems and possibilities that he was responsible for. It was terrifying and oddly comforting at the same time. The first week established a pattern that Daniel suspected could continue indefinitely if he let it. Ayana emerged from her room only when she thought he wasn't around, taking food when he left it for her, but otherwise maintaining complete isolation. She never spoke unless directly addressed, never asked for anything, never caused any obvious trouble. But Daniel could feel the tension building like a storm gathering on the horizon. This girl had been labeled as dangerous by multiple institutions, and her current docility felt more like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike than genuine compliance. The explosion came on her 8th day at the ranch. Daniel was working on repairs to the barn roof when he heard the crash from inside the house. By the time he climbed down and got inside, he found his kitchen in chaos. Dishes smashed, furniture overturned, and Ayana standing in the middle of it all with a carving knife in her hand and murder in her eyes. Easy, Daniel said quietly, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. Nobody needs to get hurt here. I won't go back, Ayana snarled, the first full sentence she had spoken since arriving. I'll kill you first and then myself, but I won't go back to those places. What places? Schools, families, prisons, whatever you want to call them. Daniel studied her face, seeing past the rage to the terror underneath. Who said anything about sending you back? They always send me back. After I cause enough trouble, after they decide I'm not worth the effort. Well, I'm not they, Daniel said simply. And this isn't a school or a foster placement. This is my home, and as long as you're here, it's your home too. Until I break something, until I fight back, until I become too much trouble. Ayana, look around. You just destroyed half my kitchen. I'm still here, still talking to you instead of calling for the marshal. What does that tell you? She blinked, confusion replacing some of the rage in her expression. That you're stupid? Daniel laughed, which clearly wasn't the reaction she had expected. Maybe, but I'm also stubborn, and I don't give up on people just because they have bad days. This isn't a bad day, Ayana said with bitter honesty. This is who I am. This is what I do when people try to control me. Then I guess I better not try to control you. The simple statement seemed to take the wind out of her sails. She lowered the knife slightly, staring at him with obvious confusion. What? You heard me. I'm not going to try to control you. You're not a prisoner here, and I'm not your warden. Then what am I? Daniel considered the question seriously. I don't know yet. We'll have to figure that out together. Ayana set the knife down on the ruined table, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "You're going to regret this. Everyone always regrets taking me in. Maybe. But that's my choice to make, isn't it?" That evening, they worked together to clean up the mess she had made. Daniel didn't lecture her or demand explanations, just handed her a broom and started sweeping. When they were finished, he made dinner as if nothing had happened. "Why aren't you angry?" Ayana asked as they ate. "Should I be? I destroyed your things. I threatened you with a knife. You were scared," Daniel said matter-of-factly. "Scared people do stupid things sometimes. I should know." "What stupid things have you done?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, surprised by the personal question. "When my wife died, I spent 6 months trying to drink myself to death. Destroyed most of what we had built together. Drove away every friend I had left." "What stopped you?" "I ran out of whiskey and was too proud to go to town for more." Ayana almost smiled at that, just a tiny quirk at the corner of her mouth that transformed her face. "And then? And then I had to decide whether to rebuild or give up completely. I chose to rebuild." "Why?" "Because giving up felt like letting the grief win, and Catherine wouldn't have wanted that." They ate in comfortable silence after that, and when Ayana helped him wash the dishes without being asked, Daniel felt like they had crossed some invisible line from hostility to possibility. The real test came 3 weeks later, when the neighbors started voicing their concerns. "Daniel, you can't be serious about keeping that Indian girl," said Mrs. Henderson, who had driven out from town specifically to share her disapproval. "Everyone knows she's dangerous. She attacked a teacher with scissors, burned down a dormitory." "Where did you hear that?" Daniel asked. "Everyone's talking about it. Marshall Thompson's been telling people about her history. She's not safe to have around decent folks." Daniel felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "What people choose to talk about in town isn't my concern, Mrs. Henderson. What happens on my property is. But Daniel, think about your reputation. Think about what people will say. People will say whatever they want to say regardless of what I do. I learned that a long time ago." Mrs. Henderson left in a huff, but she was just the first of several visitors who came to express their concerns about Daniel's decision to keep Ayana. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Warnings about her dangerous nature, predictions of disaster, and thinly veiled suggestions that he was making a terrible mistake. The worst was Reverend Phillips, who arrived with a delegation from the church to offer what he called spiritual guidance. "Brother Mitchell," Phillips said with the pompous authority of someone who had never doubted his own righteousness, "we're concerned about your soul. Living in isolation with a heathen savage, without proper supervision. Well, it's a situation that could lead to temptation and sin." "What kind of temptation?" Daniel asked quietly. "The kind that decent people don't discuss in polite company. But you're a man alone, and she's a young woman of questionable morals and upbringing." Daniel felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. "Reverend, you have 30 seconds to get off my property before I forget my manners." "Now see here, 25 seconds. You're making a grave mistake, Mitchell. That girl will bring you nothing but trouble. 20 seconds. Phillips and his delegation left with muttered threats about contacting higher authorities, but their words lingered in Daniel's mind, not because he believed them, but because he was beginning to understand the kind of prejudice and suspicion that Ayana had faced her entire life. That evening, he found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the valley with an expression he couldn't read. "You heard them," she said without looking at him. "Some of it. They're right, you know. I am trouble. I always have been." "According to who?" "According to everyone who's ever tried to help me." Daniel sat down beside her, choosing his words carefully. "Can I tell you what I think? You think I should be grateful, that I should try harder to fit in, to be what they want me to be. Actually, I think you're exactly what you're supposed to be. And I think the people who couldn't handle that were the ones with the problem, not you." Ayana turned to look at him with surprise. "You don't know what I've done. I know what they say you've done. That's not the same thing. I did burn down a dormitory. Why? Because they locked me in it for 3 days without food for speaking Apache to another girl. And the teacher you attacked? He was hitting children for not speaking English correctly. I told him to stop. He hit me. I fought back." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sounds like you were defending yourself and others. That's not trouble, Ayana. That's courage. The white world doesn't see it that way. Some of the white world doesn't see it that way, Daniel corrected. But not all of us are the same, just like not all Apache are the same. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel found himself thinking about courage, about the difference between causing trouble and standing up for what was right. The Reverend was wrong about something else too, Daniel said eventually. What? He said you'd bring me nothing but trouble. But the truth is, having you here has made me feel more alive than I have in 7 years. Ayana looked at him with something that might have been hope. Even after I destroyed your kitchen. Especially after you destroyed my kitchen. It showed me you still had fight left in you. I was starting to worry they had broken your spirit. Why does that matter to you? Daniel considered the question, trying to find words for feelings he hadn't examined too closely. Because I know what it's like to have people give up on you. And I know what it's like to give up on yourself. I don't want either of those things to happen to you. The next morning brought a visit from Marshal Thompson, along with 2 men Daniel didn't recognize. They wore the dark suits and grim expressions of federal officials, and their presence immediately put him on alert. Mitchell, Thompson said without his usual casual greeting, these gentlemen are from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They've received some complaints about your situation here. The older of the 2 officials, a thin man with steel-gray hair and cold eyes, stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Agent Harrison. We've had reports that you're not properly managing your charge. There have been incidents, disturbances. What kind of incidents? Property damage, violent outbursts, failure to maintain appropriate discipline. Daniel felt Ayana tense beside him, though she remained silent. Who reported these incidents? That's not relevant. What matters is that this girl has proven once again that she cannot be successfully integrated into civilized society. She's been perfectly fine here, Daniel said firmly. Mr. Mitchell, we appreciate your efforts, but frankly, you lack the training and resources to handle a case this difficult. We're here to transfer her to a more appropriate facility. What kind of facility? Agent Harrison's expression didn't change. A secure institution designed for dangerous individuals who cannot function in normal society. Daniel felt ice form in his veins. You're talking about a prison. We're talking about a place where she can be properly controlled and supervised. She's 16 years old. She's 16 years old and has a documented history of violence and destruction. She's proven that she cannot be trusted in community settings. Daniel looked at Ayana, who stood perfectly still with her eyes fixed on the ground. She had gone back to that terrible stillness that had marked her first days at the ranch, the frozen posture of someone who had learned that resistance only made things worse. No, Daniel said quietly. Excuse me? I said no. She stays here. Agent Harrison's eyes narrowed. Mr. Mitchell, this is not a negotiation. We have the authority to remove her regardless of your preferences. And I have the authority to defend my property and the people on it. Are you threatening federal agents? I'm stating my position. Ayana stays here where she's safe and cared for. She's not going to any institution. Mr. Mitchell, the second agent spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a reasonable tone that was somehow more threatening than Harrison's bluntness. Perhaps you don't understand the situation. This girl is dangerous. She's already caused significant damage here, and it's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt. The only people who have hurt her are the ones trying to control her, Daniel replied. She's not the problem. The system is the problem. The system, Harrison said with obvious disdain, is designed to protect society from individuals who cannot conform to civilized standards. Your system, Daniel corrected, is designed to break people who don't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. And I won't be part of it. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with the agents clearly not accustomed to having their authority challenged so directly. Finally, Harrison reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. Mr. Mitchell, this is a federal removal order. You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can return with marshals and take her by force. Either way, she's coming with us. Daniel took the document and read it carefully, noting the legal language and official seals that gave it weight. But he also noted something else. A date that was 3 days in the future. This order isn't effective until Friday, he observed. That's correct. We're giving you time to prepare her for transfer. How generous. After the agents left, Daniel and Ayana stood in the yard looking at each other, with the shared understanding that their time together was running out. "I'm sorry," Ayana said quietly. "I've brought this trouble on you." "No," Daniel replied firmly. "They brought this trouble. You just gave them an excuse." "What will you do?" Daniel looked at the removal order in his hands, then at the young woman who had become more important to him than he had realized. "I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up on you. Maybe you should. Maybe they're right, and I'm too much trouble for anyone to handle." "Ayana, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and Daniel saw all the pain and fear she usually kept hidden. 3 weeks ago, you asked me why I wasn't angry about the kitchen. Do you remember what I told you? That scared people do stupid things. That's right, but there's something else I should have said. I didn't choose to take you in because I thought it would be easy. I didn't choose you because you were convenient or simple or safe. Then why? Daniel found himself saying words he hadn't consciously planned, but which felt absolutely true the moment they left his mouth. I chose you because you needed someone to choose you. Because you deserved someone who would fight for you instead of giving up when things got difficult. I didn't choose easy, Ayana. I chose you. For the first time since he had known her, Ayana began to cry. Not the quiet tears of sadness, but the raw, overwhelming sobs of someone who had carried too much pain for too long. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept for everything she had lost and everything she had never had. And as he held her, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "We're not going to let them take you," he said quietly. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to find a way." The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a physician from Denver who had been researching the treatment of Native American children in government institutions. She arrived at Daniel's ranch the day before the removal order was set to take effect, driving a small buggy and carrying a leather satchel that marked her as someone accustomed to traveling to remote places. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Morgan. I'd like to speak with you about Ayana." Daniel studied the woman carefully. She was perhaps 40 years old, with graying hair and the calm competence of someone who had dealt with difficult situations before. But more importantly, she had kind eyes. "What about her?" "I've been documenting cases of abuse and mistreatment in the federal Indian school system. Ayana's story has come to my attention, and I'd like to help." Over the next several hours, Dr. Morgan interviewed both Daniel and Ayana, taking detailed notes about the girl's experiences in various institutions and her current situation at the ranch. She was thorough, professional, and clearly genuinely concerned about Ayana's welfare. "The removal order is based on reports of continued violent behavior," Dr. Morgan explained as they sat around Daniel's kitchen table. "But from what I've observed, there's no evidence of ongoing problems." "Because there aren't any," Daniel said. "She's been fine here." "That's exactly my point. The Bureau has made its decision based on incomplete and biased information. They haven't bothered to assess her current situation or consider whether she might simply need a different environment to thrive." "Can you stop them?" "I can try. I have connections with sympathetic officials in Washington, people who are beginning to question the current system. If I can document that Ayana is thriving in your care, it might be enough to override the removal order." Dr. Morgan spent 3 days at the ranch, observing the daily routines that Daniel and Ayana had developed. She watched them work together on ranch chores, noted the way Ayana had taken responsibility for maintaining the vegetable garden, documented the genuine affection and respect that had grown between them. "You've done something remarkable here," Dr. Morgan told Daniel on her final evening. "You've given her what she needed most, unconditional acceptance and the freedom to be herself. I've just treated her like family." "Exactly. And that's what's been missing from every other placement. Everyone else saw her as a problem to be solved, or a savage to be civilized. You saw her as a person worth caring about." Dr. Morgan's report, combined with testimony from Daniel and Ayana herself, proved persuasive enough to halt the removal order. The Bureau agreed to allow Ayana to remain at the ranch under Daniel's guardianship, with regular visits from social workers to monitor the situation. The first such visit came 2 months later, conducted by a young man named James Wheeler, who had obviously expected to find evidence of the dangerous behavior that had marked Ayana's previous placements. Instead, he found a confident young woman who could discuss ranch management, demonstrate her knowledge of both English and Apache languages, and speak eloquently about her plans for the future. "Miss Ayana," Wheeler said with obvious surprise, "you seem different from what I expected. Different how? More mature, more settled. Ayana looked at Daniel, then back at the social worker. I am different, but not because I changed who I am, because I finally found someone who liked who I am. And what about you, Mr. Mitchell? Wheeler asked. Any regrets about taking on such a challenging case? Daniel looked at Ayana, who was waiting for his answer with the careful attention she still sometimes showed when she wasn't completely sure of her place in the world. No regrets, Daniel said firmly. Best decision I ever made. Even though she was labeled as trouble, especially because she was labeled as trouble, it meant she was strong enough to fight for herself when no one else would fight for her. Years passed, and the warnings about Ayana proved to be completely unfounded. She finished her education through correspondence courses, learned to manage the financial aspects of the ranch, and became an advocate for other Native American children trapped in the federal system. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had listened to the warnings? Ayana asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching another sunset paint the sky. No, Daniel replied immediately. I know exactly what would have happened. I would have missed the chance to have a daughter, and you would have missed the chance to have a home. Even though I was trouble, you were never trouble. You were just someone who refused to be broken by people who didn't understand your worth. Ayana smiled, the same transformation of her face that had marked their first real conversation years earlier. And you were someone brave enough to see past the warnings to the person underneath. I didn't choose easy, Daniel said, repeating the words that had become something of a family motto. I chose you, and I chose you back, Ayana replied. Best choice I ever made. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Daniel reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. The government had sent him what they considered a problem to be managed, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable. A daughter who had taught him that love wasn't about finding someone easy to live with, but about choosing someone worth fighting for. The warnings had been wrong. Ayana hadn't brought him trouble. She had brought him purpose, family, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the most rewarding outcomes. And in the quiet contentment of their evening ritual, surrounded by the ranch they had built together into something more than either could have achieved alone, Daniel knew that he would make the same choice again without hesitation. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Because love wasn't about choosing the safe path. It was about choosing the person worth walking any path beside, no matter how challenging it might be.